because you see, I was in Calcutta in '74, preparing for my masters, and it was the best library I found, the best books and journals we could lay our hands on. So this is where I read some articles about Latin America. We didn't know, so even international relations, Latin America hardly figured, and people simply had no idea. Whatever little idea they had, particularly in the press or people had, was based on how Americans looked at Latin America. So, the sombrero wearing and then kind of, the siesta loving people, the dull and all that. This was the image. But the other image was hidden. People had no idea to know. Till such time you go there and see how wonderful the people are. It is where, in fact, when I was in Mexico, I explored the possibility of going to Cuba. And they said you can come only as a tourist in a group. And as a tourist, you can't talk to a foreign minister, you can't talk to anyone and go to a library and all the sites. It makes no sense. I realized that the Mexican newspapers were not covering so much the Caribbean part. So I started kind of writing with individual countries or CARICOM and things like that. I must say that I was very lucky. And I had met one of the officials from the Cuadernos del Tercer Mundo, the third world magazine. And I said that, look, my PhD is on Cuba, but I have not been able to go, the difficulties, I can go only as a tourist. And so he said, no, let me see, I will help. After a few months, he said, look, I have arranged your visit to Cuba for a month.
Hola y bienvenidos otra vez a un episodio muy especial de mi canal de YouTube Español por Dentro. Estamos aquí en el campus de la Universidad de Jawaharlal Nehru, una universidad que es muy famosa por sus actividades académicas, especialmente en el campo de las lenguas extranjeras. Estamos aquí con un invitado muy especial y la razón por la que estamos aquí en la Universidad de Jawaharlal Nehru es también muy importante porque el invitado de hoy es un ex alumni de esta universidad, un ex estudiante. Estamos aquí con el destacado profesor, periodista y investigador, Dr. Narain Roy. Thank you so much, Dr. Roy, for being here.
Thank you very much. Muchas gracias.
So, of course, Dr. Roy, pues él habla español, pero él es más cómodo. He's more comfortable giving the interview in English. So, this interview is going to be in English. And we are going to dive deep into the exotic world of Latin America through the eyes and writings of Dr. Roy. Dr. Roy is an immense figure in the field of Latin American studies, research. He has also been an ex-director of the Institute of Social Sciences, if I'm not wrong, sir. Yeah. And he, of course, did his PhD from JNU. We're going to talk a little bit more about that as well. And he has written extensively on foreign policy, especially in the region of Latin America. But of course, not just about that. It goes much beyond that. But since our channel is focused on Spain and Latin America, we are going to dive deep into the wonderful world of Latin America. We're going to ask Dr. Roy about the many experiences he has had of traveling to Latin America, writing about Latin America, and how India and Latin America in the 21st century, especially in 2025 that we are in, how is it shaping up and what potential it has in future. So, Dr. Roy, firstly, we are in the wonderful campus of JNU. We just came here about 15-20 minutes ago. The birds are chirping. It's still quiet. The admin people are still coming and settling into their office seats. Students haven't yet started coming in. But how do you feel coming to JNU? I don't know, since like after how long have you been here?
Well, I I was here a couple of months ago in connection with that international seminar that the center organized.
Yeah.
And occasionally I have also been coming. I think I also came I was one of the experts during the interview for the poster professor in the Latin American Studies Center and Language. So one has been coming here in connection with some program or otherwise also meeting with friends and all that. But the association has been quite long. As probably you know that I came in 1977.
Wow.
It was very different time and different world.
Right.
So I think coming to the Center of Latin American Studies itself was a great exotic idea. Maybe we can talk about that.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, so.
In fact, I would love to take you back all the way to 77, Dr. Roy, when you started studying here. How was the atmosphere here in JNU, and what did you do your study on?
Yeah, the atmosphere was fabulous because you see, the best in JNU, I think we were very lucky to spend time in terms of the faculty, in terms of also the students and the kind of activities they did, organizing excellent debates, culture programs, theaters, drama. Various embassies were also kind of, bringing their best troops here.
Right.
And people were kind of, feeling very comfortable. I remember how even the great people like Reshma, the singer, came here.
Okay.
Faiz Ahmad Faiz
Wow.
came here, and we heard him speak and all that. So it was a great institution. But what made it very different, that it was a research institution, and one of the attractions that I had of taking interest in Latin America, that I wanted to go to the farthest place to do the study where very few people go, very few people specialize.
Right.
And this is how the fascination for Latin America happened. And of course, the research-oriented university, where I think the students and teachers were more friendly than kind of, there was no such anytime you can walk in, they could come to your hostel, you are having chai in a dhawa and things like that. So it was a great atmosphere, academic atmosphere that I think this university was known internationally for.
Fantastic. So, Doctor, you did your PhD here. Could you tell us a little bit about what was the topic of your PhD?
Yeah. Well, the PhD, MPhil and PhD, both topics were on Cuba's relations with the Soviet Union. Because that was the time when Cuba had begun its internationalist role. And then people would wonder, but then where does the money come? So obviously people thought that it was the Soviet Union at that time, which was kind of, financing. So it was a kind of a satellite of Soviet Union. This was the kind of impression created by the Americans and all that.
Right.
So we decided, my guide suggested that since I was one who was not necessarily inclined ideologically towards A or B ideology, so I will be the right person to investigate on Cuba without looking at it necessarily from the ideological angle, but from the pragmatism that Fidel Castro was known for. So this is how I was suggested that I should do my PhD on that.
So, Doctor, very interesting that you took Cuba as a topic all those years ago. So, why and how did you choose, Cuba and Latin America as a whole as an area of specialization? What piqued your interest?
Yeah, that because you see, I was in Calcutta in '74, preparing for my masters, and it was the best library I found, the best books and journals we could lay our hands on. So this is where I read some articles about Latin America. We didn't know, so even international relations, Latin America hardly figured in all this. I thought, look, this is one area where not many people take interest, not many people possibly know. So why not specialize in Latin America? But then where? So then we discovered that JNU had a Center for Latin American Studies. There was a division at that time. It was part of American West European Center. So I decided to do it, so that I thought, let me go to the farthest where very few people go.
Right.
And one of the reasons was that at that time JNU would facilitate your field visit at their cost for at least 5 to 6 months. So I thought, okay, I mean, it is very childish at this stage. Look like at least you will go and spend some time in Latin America.
Yeah.
And it so happened that after some time, Mexican government announced this scholarship, which was for 1 year to be extended by another year and all that.
Okay.
And which I got along with SP Ganguly.
Okay.
And we were together there. So, it was very interesting in that sense that I wanted, but then how to finance our stay, and then the scholarship came our way, and then there was no turning back.
Wow, that's fantastic. And wonderful that you mentioned the name of the veteran Mr. Ganguly. I'm just trying to imagine a younger Mr. Ganguly and a younger Mr. Roy would have had a wonderful time exploring Mexico. And so Dr. Roy, we're talking about late 70s, early 80s. So during that time, what was the perception of the region of Latin America, in Indian media? How was it being perceived?
I think the Indian media hardly covered that area, except when there was a military coup. It was the time when Latin America was perhaps synonymous military coups and kind of armed rebellion, guerrilla violence. So people thought it is a land of perennial revolutions and military coups. So in fact, there were some who said that it's a kind of, you keep, shifting between the coup and the revolution and all that. So that was the perception. And people simply had no idea. Whatever little idea they had, particularly in the press or people had, was based on how Americans looked at Latin America. So, the sombrero wearing, and then kind of, the siesta loving people, the dull and all that. This was the image. But the other image was hidden. So people had no idea to know. Till such time you go there and see how wonderful the people are, the kind of exceptional things that the region had done, but then we did not know about that, and we can talk about some of those in the course of our discussions and all that. So this was the image. You could hardly see any news in Indian press about Latin America. And I must say that when I joined Hindustan Times, I must be one of the few who would be writing occasionally on Latin America. So we were able to kind of, keep some interest, whether it's Cuba or Argentina or Brazil, except football. We got to know about that.
So I'm sticking to that, Dr. Roy. You talked about Indian media, or the people here in India couldn't consume much except what probably the US showed. So what was US's mindset and attitude towards Latin America during that time, if you could explore a bit?
Because the US thought it as a zone of influence. And that's why they thought that, look, we are the boss, and they have to kind of, accept. And this is exactly, it behaved like a neo-imperialist power. In 1898, it occupied Cuba, and it had intervened in many countries through the military coups, whether it is Jacobo Arbenz regime in '54 in Guatemala, whether it was Cuba Missile Crisis in '62, or a Dominican crisis in '65, and later on Chile, that the Allende regime was ousted. So they were very blatantly doing that. This is our area. This hemisphere belongs to us. And they also had the Monroe Doctrine earlier, which said that, look, we will not allow any other power to kind of have any presence and all that. So that was very clearly the angle, and that's why possibly in a country like India and others possibly learn to kind of to accept that kind of a vision. Except we must talk about that how Latin American countries and India were still working together on UN platform and on global platforms in terms of creating the nuclear free zone that Mexico, of course, was instrumental in doing, or the new international economic order, new world media order. All those ideas were being talked about, and Latin Americans played a great role along with Indian leadership. So this is where the commonality was, and we were kind of interacting. Of course, many of them were not members of the non-aligned movement. Cuba became, and later on, much later, others came because they had their own doubts, which of course my book also explores, that they thought that they got decolonized much before Asia, Africa. So why should they be part of that grouping called the non-alignment and things like that and all that. So this is how it was.
Interesting. So Dr. Roy, moving ahead, you went to Mexico and you got the scholarship. So tell us a little bit about your time in Mexico. how did that shape your evolution of your interest in Latin America? What interesting things did you see there?
Yeah. Because you see, the language was an important issue to start with, even though I had done a certificate course, 2 semesters in JNU.
Right.
And incidentally, my classmate was P.V. Narasimha Rao.
Right. Oh, okay. Wow.
Because he was the former Chief Minister of Andhra Pradesh, but he was Member of Parliament then.
Right.
But a lot of interest in learning language. So he was
wow.
along with me, and Meenu Bakshi was teaching. She was just fresh from her degree and all that.
Wow, fantastic.
And occasionally Narasimha Rao will drop me to Sattla's hostel. He said, I'm going there to meet friends, So I had some idea about the language. And then the moment we reached there, we were asked to do 3 months intensive language course, which helped. But then once you are there, you started talking to the landlady, the street people and things like that, make mistake and all that. So we picked up, and somehow I picked up quite well. And after a while and all that, I started writing also in Mexican newspapers and all that. So that was. But they were very fascinated to meet with an Indian. Of course, they will say, "Oh, Indian." So everybody, certain kind of food habit, and why people are vegetarian. Everybody does yoga. Everybody must be knowing how to read your palm and things like that were there.
Okay.
This was the general impression, just as we had our own impression of Latin America being a kind of lazy people, siesta loving and all that. But then we realized gradually that it was it's a wrong conception. There was world beyond that, and both countries, both regions had great ideas, flourishing, scholarship, traditions, culture, and world view. To contribute to the world and all that. So this is how it was. But people were very welcoming when they knew that I was from India. They thought, no, the Indians, they are very fine people. You see NASA, you see American universities, they all dominate. So this is how they complimented you. So, and it so happened that the house where I was staying, after a year, another scholar will come. After another will come. And I will kind of, be the local host, and then later on they will shift to another house. So the landlady and landlord thought that everybody from India coming for PhD. So some of them possibly said, "Wow, this is great. I mean, we didn't know that." So so in that sense, by default, we are a good image of good students, researchers, scientists, and academics like that.
Fantastic. So, Doctor, your PhD topic was on Cuba, but you ended up landing in Mexico.
Yeah.
So why did that happen?
This is very interesting. You see, the very reason why my supervisor decided that I should be doing on Cuba was because Cuba was very much in the news, particularly Castro's revolution, and by the time he had moved into Africa, sending expeditionary forces in support of Horn of Africa or Angola, and things like that and all that. So he thought that, look, you are not ideologically too inclined towards A or B. You are kind of independent ideologically. So you will be the best person to do research on Cuba. So you will not be carried away by the kind of certain party lines and things like that, and you will be much more objective. This is how he chose. But how to go to Cuba to do the field work? It was kind of very different society. Where in fact, when I was in Mexico, I explored the possibility of going to Cuba, and they said you can come only as a tourist in a group. And as a tourist, you can't talk to foreign minister, you can't talk to anyone and go to a library and all that. I said, this made no sense. I said, okay, closest is Mexico, which had an excellent library. El Colegio had an excellent library on Cuba, on any such things. So go there and then we'll see. And it so happened that I started writing for Mexican journals and newspapers, where I met one guy, Naiva Moreira, he was the editor, and Jerónimo Cardoso, who was looking after the edition in Mexico. So I said, look, I have never gone to Cuba. He said, I will send you. And after a while, he said, you go there for a month, everything paid, because this is the 30th anniversary of the attack on Cuartel Moncada, that is the Moncada barracks, and you will be the state host. In fact, they put us up in Hotel Nacional de Cuba, which is such a amazing and legendary place and all that. And so I made use of that stay to talk to various people, various art, Nicolas Guillen, Alicia Alonso, great ballerina, and then many of the Carlos Rafael Rodriguez, who was the vice president of Cuba, and many others. So I was able to kind of somehow do that. So that was the best that one could do, because there was no scholarship given by the Cubans, and then you may not be freely able to move and do things. The limitations. So that's why.
Right.
But I was happy that it happened through the Mexico route.
Wow, fantastic. So, Doctor, you mentioned about the fact that you wrote for some Mexican newspapers as well. So, how was the journalistic experience for you in Mexico?
This is a very good question, because you see, remember that was the time when large number of writers, journalists, military leaders, political leaders from South America were living in Mexico. Mexico City was the New York of the world, where people could come and stay and take refuge and write and do activities and all that. So this is where I got to know many journalists from Argentina and Brazil and Mexico and all that. And so they when I met them somewhere, they say that, why don't you write? But I said, look, you don't expect me to write only in India. I'm a scholar in Latin America. He said, you can also write in Latin America. And this is how I started writing for Cuadernos del Tercer Mundo. It had 3 editions. In English, it was Third World. And in Spanish, it was Cuadernos del Tercer Mundo. And in Portuguese, it was Caderno de Terceiro Mundo. And that is still there and all that. So I started writing there. Then they put me in contact with El Dia, was the daily periodic newspaper, where I would have written maybe 100 articles. So in Spanish and all that. So this is how I became a journalist. Later on, they decided to have the encyclopedic publication on the Third World called Guía del Tercer Mundo, the Third World Guide, where I was also one of the joint contributors to that volume. So I think Latin America academically also kind of, shaped me very well. And this is how one took advantage of a great tradition of scholarship. We were not only confined to El Colegio, which itself was a great institution, but also UNAM, Universidad Metropolitana. I also went to El Tec de Monterrey, various other places in San Cristobal and all that. So I think I wouldn't have been what I am today without spending 4 years in Mexico. 6 months, 1 year, no. By the time you know the language or you begin to have contact, this long stay is what made so much of a difference in my orientation, in my career, in my thinking, in my perception. And I feel very happy on that score that, and I kept going to Mexico and Latin America as a journalist. Otherwise also. So
that's fascinating, sir. So you talked a little bit about your journalistic experience. So what kind of topics did you write on in these Mexican dailies, and anything about India that you used to write as well?
Of course, mostly on Latin American issues, including individual countries. And I realized that the Mexican newspapers were not covering so much the Caribbean part. So I started kind of writing with the individual countries or CARICOM and things like that. Of course, Cuba they covered, but the rest of Caribbean not. And also some of the individual countries which did not figure. That was the time of guerrilla war in Central America, so they were concentrating primarily on El Salvador, Nicaragua, and things like that and all that. So as far as India is concerned, so there was a lot of interest in what Indira Gandhi did and who she was. So a lot of interest in her policies or her kind of, mostly they would write about her international figure, a woman of outstanding, character and things like that. So that was one issue. Could be on sometimes contemporary issues if some dispute has arisen, but developmental a little bit and primarily foreign policy oriented. So if something happened, India was always active in terms of foreign policy. So these were the issues from India also I would have covered, but primarily on Latin America.
On Latin America. So, Dr. Roy, my next question to you is something that sort of piqued my interest. You formed a musical group called Ras Manjari in Mexico. In fact, you performed in several places, including outside Mexico City as well. So, please unpack us a little bit about that. What was this group all about?
Yeah. I think before that, let me also briefly tell you that when we were in JNU, I came here in 77. I was in JLM hostel. So I got in touch with Manjushri Chauhan. She was a good singer, and she had just retired from Japanese language center. And then we had Mahendra Shishodia at the time, then A. Ramaiya, who was retired from TIS, and then Vagish Jha, he was also in history, who recently passed away. So some of us got together and thought that, why can't we organize the hostel night? And people say, hostel night, what is this? So we kind of, decided to have the hostel night on the rooftop of JLM hostel.
Oh, wow.
And have the musical program. So we practiced in my room and then performed for an hour and then had the meal and all that. And the following year, Satluj night, Ganga night, Kaveri night, all this happened. So I think you must take that credit.
Yeah.
So that was some advantage that we were performing together and all. When I was in Mexico, I think I was in the embassy, and I saw one lady was singing semi-classical and some folk song when tabla was just kept there and all that. So someone knew that I could play, so I was also roped in, and then of course didn't perform, but then I may have sung something. And the lady who was having a kind of a musical group, Pali Dhawan, she contacted me. Next day she comes to El Colegio and took me home, and I could see that an American on flute and Mexican on guitar and myself on tabla, and she's singing. So this is how we started performing. And then we performed not just in Indian Embassy, but also in Radio UNAM, then Puebla, inside the church in Puebla, then in Tepoztlán, then in Toluca, then in Chiapas and all that. So we kind of, this is how we did it. Now you will say, what kind of music? Well, music will be, one item will be duo de guitarra y tabla. That was happening.
What we call in Hindi as Jugalbandi.
Jugalbandi, so that we did in my own way. I'm not a great tabla player, but then, we did it. And then maybe I sang a few Rajasthani, Bhojpuri, that kind of songs and all that. Mrs. Dhawan, Bhajan, and it was exciting. I mean, I could see people meditating and all that. That was.
Fantastic.
At the time, we had too many Sai Baba centers, and many of them were kind of into visiting India and all that.
Right.
So this is how it happened. So last year, when I had gone to Mexico, I spent one month with my wife and daughter. So I took her to El Colegio. So I look, this is where I studied. This is where we perform. And to UNAM, then to Puebla, where we perform. Then to San Cristobal, where we performed. To all these places. I can possibly supply some of the photograph also if you want to put it and all that.
Sure.
So this is how that musical thing happened. We also performed in Festival Cervantino, which is a very prestigious festival of world music and all that. We were also playing along with the Mexican group and all that. So it's a great experience of
Fantastic.
being in music as well.
Well, I mean, I've known Dr. Roy for a while now, but this is a revelation that he played the tabla as well. That's fantastic. These are the kind of things, when you do interviews with such people, these are the kind of things that come out, which generally when we meet in conferences and all, these things get somehow ignored. So, Dr. Roy, I mean, so let me tell once again to all my viewers, we are in the beautiful JNU campus here, the Jawaharlal Nehru University campus. It's about 9:20 in the morning, so the sun god is still being a bit easy on us and not having its full force, and we're getting some gentle breeze from time to time. So that's sort of helping us, get through this heat. So, Dr. Roy, we talked about, your opportunity of going to Mexico, writing in the Mexican dailies, forming this group called Ras Manjari. Fantastic. And I would like now to take you a little forward in terms of your experience of visiting Cuba, and listening to people like Fidel Castro, Raul Castro, Daniel Ortega, and others in Santiago de Cuba. How was that experience?
Yeah, that was fantastic. And I must say that I was very lucky. And I had met one of the the officials from the Cuadernos del Tercer Mundo, the third world magazine. And I said that, look, my PhD is on Cuba, but I have not been able to go, the difficulties, I can go only as a tourist. And so he said, no, let me see, I will help. After a few months, he said, look, I have arranged your visit to Cuba for a month. Everything paid. I said, wow. I says 1 month is still better than going as a tourist for a week or things like that. So so that was a special occasion, the 30th anniversary of attack on Moncada barracks, which led to the beginning of Castro-led revolution.
Right.
Of course, at that time he got captured and the movement failed. But then he wrote the famous document Historia me absolverá, history will absolve me. And after a while, how the Sierra Maestra and Cuban Revolution and all that. So this is how I went there. Now, there was a reception for all the people. There were media people and other people from all over the world. And in Palacio de la Revolution, there was a reception. So I had reached well in time. And moving around and then started talking to some people. And then I could see that someone very tall, huge, is walking in. I say, is it Fidel Castro? He can say, yes. And then he comes followed by the NBC and ABC. We have no CNN and all that. Cameramen. We were not allowed to take a camera. And then very close to us, as close as perhaps we are, little. And then Castro comes and surrounded by the media and the people. And he gave 1.5 hour interview. And I came in practically half of the frame. I saw the interview later on, but of course, there's no way to keep the copy and all that.
Right.
And I realized, my God, the guy is so well educated, a great intellectual. His readings, his views, his articulation, persona is, of course, is there and all that. So he was able to kind of, do that. It was a great experience listening to him in such close proximity. Of course, we are not asking him and all that, but we could hear the whole conversation. After 2 days, we were all taken to Santiago de Cuba, where that Moncada barrack is. So early morning, they enacted the storming of the Moncada barrack. So Castro was there, 2 brothers. Then you have Daniel Ortega was there. Maurice Bishop was in Granada, who was also Reagan ousted him and all that. So all these guys spoke. I remember 90 minutes of Fidel Castro's speech, and it will be interrupted by the slogans, El Pueblo, Unidos, jamás será vencidos. Now this is exactly what kept happening and all this. Is a great moment. And also in Cuba, I was lucky to talk to Nicolas Guillen, Alicia Alonso, and Carlos Rafael Rodriguez, who was the vice president of Cuba, their deputy foreign minister, I forgot the name, and many other people. So I spent, that was very useful from my point of view. This is how I managed to be in Cuba, to experience what Cuba was doing, plus collect some material for my PhD.
Right, fantastic. So, Dr. Roy, I would just like to be on this this moment that you came across Fidel Castro, and you talked, of course, a bit about his persona. Anything else that you could tell about Fidel Castro that normally people may not be able to perceive through just writing or listening about his life. So, what was that moment when you really came across him?
Yeah, I think it was overwhelming. You can't believe that someone like him, who is so tall, so charismatic, and he's before you. I mean, we couldn't even say that, can you organize a meeting for us to go? Nowhere. So you have too many journalists, no one cared and all that. So it's something out of the blue, and I could be one of them, but no, I was so privileged that I was, along with the circle of maybe 15, 16 people, I was as close to that.
Wow.
The camera, the correspondent, and then since I was there, so I was so close in that sense. What impressed me is his confidence in what he says, his analysis of the world. And his advantage is that he's such a well-read man. And he had his own vision for Cuba. I don't know, many people possibly don't know. He was never a member of the Communist Party of Cuba. His brother was. So Cuba was a nationalist, but he first and foremost objective of Castro and his revolution was to survive. How do you survive when you are so close to Miami, 90 miles off, and they had the experience of ousting governments in Nicaragua and elsewhere and all that. So it was his pragmatism that helped sustain. And I give you the example of 1960 when Castro goes to New York. And when the Americans asked him, in case of conflict between democracy and socialism, which side you will be? He said, I will be on the side of democracy. That led to the thinking that, look, this guy is a Democrat, he may be romantic revolutionary, he is this, that, and all that. This helped him to stabilize his regime, as also to have a good contact with the Russians, so that Russians could provide the critical petrol to them and buy the only thing that Cuba has is sugar and a little bit of nickel. Now, if Americans decide not to buy or no one decides, you are collapsing. So he ensured that not only his regime survives with the deployment of the nuclear weapons and all that, but also economy sustains. So I could see his pragmatism was speaking because of his experience. And so Castro has to be evaluated differently. He was so different from rest of the great. Che Guevara is in a different league and all that. So I think the two were kind of combining, but had there been no Castro, it would not have survived for long. And it continues to survive because of his pragmatism. Of course, there are crisis situations and all that, but he made the very best of it. So this is the Castro that we saw and we interacted. My God, it was
fantastic,
amazing feeling.
Fantastic. So also, Dr. Roy, amongst the many other accomplishments that you've had was an interview with the Brazilian president, Fernando Henrique Cardoso, who was the chief guest on Republic Day in 1996. So tell us a little bit about that experience, sir.
Yeah, because I was with Hindustan Times and the editor knew that I was, into Latin America and all that. He said that we have been invited. So the Brazilian embassy invited 3 journalists, myself, K.K. Katyal, who was a great journalist in Hindu, and Seema Guha, she was then in Times of India. So 3 of us went there. And so we said, coming to Cardoso, now Cardoso was a great dependency theorist, along with Gundar Frank and many others. So one had known that he is a guy who is an intellectual giant. And when he became a president, I think I wrote a piece that how he is like in the mold of a philosopher king. That you have a great intellectual who is at the helm of affairs. And I remember before he assumed office, he organized a big international congress on theory and then, alternative worldviews and things like this. So got the best minds from the world to have a discussions, and I have those papers somewhere, some of the discussions and all that. So, and it was so easy going, no security, nothing, and then we talk, and then we don't know how to, because he's such a great scholar and all that. So, of course, we were primarily asking him about India, Brazil's new foreign policy, stabilization of democracy, and then about India and things like that and all that. Of course, not on his dependency theory. And so it was a kind of, and not only that, we were able to talk to the foreign minister, the economy minister, the sports minister, and we also went to other cities for seminars. So it was a great experience going to Brazil, and then I wrote a series of articles. Maybe someday I will share those articles.
Sure, fantastic. And now I would like you to talk a little bit about the Latin American left. And how has that sort of evolved over the period of time?
Let me mention 3 names. And I think the 3 names I also admire very much. And I think they also defined the left, so to say. Fidel Castro, of course. And we have talked a little bit about that. And Fidel Castro was in the mold of, ultimately, though he did not start that way, but then ultimately he became a protagonist of the way one saw Marxism, Leninism
Right.
across the world and all that. And the second person is Lula. Now, Lula is an amazing guy who came from a very humble background. He was simply a factory worker, barely literate and all that. But he organized the workers, he had that ability and all that. Now, when he becomes the president for the first time, he did something which became a global model. Zero hunger program,
Okay.
Bolsa Familia. Now, this is a model that ultimately every country, developing country, including us, that food program and then, Manrega, all these things. Now, Brazil did very successfully because Lula knew that it had to have a specific angle to that in order to make it a success. So he did three things. One was that let the money which goes to the beneficiary goes to the woman head. The women would know how important is feeding, how important is girls' education and attention and all that. So at the center of his scheme was women. So that was one. Number two, he also did he involved the federal, the state, and the local. The three governments, I think, came together to do that. It became a kind of a global model. Now, this is how he begins and all that. Then, when it comes to even IBSA and later on BRICS, his contribution is immense. It was in Avian in France, here I may get slightly confused, where Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, Lula, maybe South African president, I don't know who was at that time, they were also invited on the sidelines of the G7 summit. At that time it was G8, Russia was also there. And there he gave a very interesting interview. Lula said that I am not here to have the kind of, the partake of the meal served here. I want to also have cafe and the cake. He put it like that. So he called it cafe con leche, coffee with milk alliance. And so this is how he perceived. And then ultimately IBSA was conceptualized. And then we decided that, look, the three great democracies representing three continents would be a great idea to kind of, come together, have our world views, and then of course also make claims on permanent membership of the UN Security Council, things like that and all that. So this is Lula, how, he sees his vision and all that. Now coming to the program and left and all that, Lula was also not a member of the Communist Party. You see, so he is a left, but then left doesn't mean only Communist Party. This is a misnomer. Left, you can be independent left. Okay. You see, left is an idea. It's a way to look at things, certain things. Now, let me come to the current phase. What has happened? Two things I will say here. One is that till last time he was very comfortable, but during this elections 2 years ago, he realized that he has lost some of the constituencies. What was the constituency? The constituency of the proletariat. Because there are no factories, so you don't have the proletariat. So who will vote for you? Obviously, you will not be able to garner enough votes to win. So he goes to urban slums. The slum workers are the new proletariat. So he called it from proletariat to pobretariat. Isn't it amazing? As someone else gave that phrase, but then it was his idea and all that. So he has been reinventing himself and his idea. Even on the issue of Cuba and Venezuela, both Boric and Lula, they have taken a very principled position. They both, and particularly Lula, blocked the entry of the Venezuelan president into expanded the bricks.
Okay.
He said that, look, you have stolen the elections. You promised to hold the free elections and allow the person who wins to take over. You have not done it. Now, this is also left. So I think the left is kind of, there are various elements. So I admire him for his pragmatism and his growth, his evolution as per the situation that allows. You can't say that, okay, I will not budge from this and then everything disappears and then you are nowhere at all.
Right.
And now Gabriel Boric, being a young leader, he has shown his ability to kind of invent politics, and he has done exactly that kind of a thing. I mean, you see his policy, despite his failure to get the constitutional amendments made, he says, okay, fine, this has not happened, so we will try to kind of do it differently and all that. So he has shown that pragmatism there. Now, in terms of the foreign policy, I'm particularly referring to the recent visit to India also. He said that, look, I mean, he has something interesting to offer in the sense, in terms of his vision, and two important things. His foreign policy is feminist. Many other countries now have feminist foreign policy, but then he has done it even more. I don't know whether you heard him speak at ICWA, where his ministry, he has more women in his cabinet than men. Number two is what he called turquoise foreign policy, where he has been an exponent of green politics, but also blue politics. Blue is kind of, how to exploit is a wrong word, how to kind of, culture the resources of the ocean. So that is important. And green, of course, a green environment and all. So I also find him, so there are three people, there could be many others. I would also mention the person who I am very influenced is Maria Tegui.
Okay.
Now, Maria Tegui was an amazing guy. In the 1920s, he is talking of Indo-American socialism. So he was a Marxism who invented Marxism in his own way. Now, he had that vision to say that. So I have written down in some of my articles that what you say, the different hues of left in Latin America coming to power in various countries is essentially Maria Teguism. That it is his idea. He gave that idea and we have done it. And remember one thing. What is Maria Teguism? What is Maria Tegui's worldview? You have the liberation theology component. You have critical pedagogy in it. You see, so there are ideas that you have taken from and also the epistemological views of the indigenous and the Latin American scholars and all that. So he was able to kind of, think of that. He died early and all that. He had also taken these elements from the Andean indigenous people who could be called proto-communist cultural set of people who knew they lived like that. So you have very few things to share. You distribute. So you doing more with less. So this was also the idea. So he said it's fine. So I admire these people, and I think they have in a way indirectly shaped my way of looking at Latin America in my
fantastic.
way.
Yeah, I mean, you've spoken very deeply about the Latin American left, Dr. Roy, and if you talk about democracy as well, and the deepening of democracy and institutional innovations in Latin America over the years, so how has that panned out according to you?
Yeah. You see, because today Latin America has become very stable because it is also democratically stable. And there are certain things that are very important to note. Latin America democratic advance that you see, except for here and there, you have all the countries which are holding regular elections, transfer of power, you see, the amount of freedom that media, of course, enjoy, the right to kind of, assemble and then organize in terms of demonstrations, in terms of protests and all that. So in that sense, democracy has stabilized. Otherwise, we used to say traditionally that Latin America has only two political parties, military and civilian. So that was the kind of thing. No more and all that. So that democracy has been consolidated. Otherwise, you had pockets like Chile, who had a democratic, Venezuela, 50s to 60s until mid 70s had very well established democratic setup. Not Mexico. Mexico was a one party domination and all that. But today, I think more and more countries have embraced. So that is one. Number two is the advance of the indigenous people. Their ability to kind of consolidate their gains and have their voice. They have also created a kind of their own worldview, epistemologies, the buen vivir, and things like that and all that. So that is another thing. The third, I would say that institutional innovation. I think constantly they have been kind of trying to experiment with some of these ideas, kind of whether it is participation of more and more people, women's participation, how indigenous could be roped into and all that. So through various mechanisms, including citizens' initiatives and all that, they have been constantly doing it. So I think Latin America people have not possibly taken note of some of these elements that you see in Latin America. These have to be talked about. These have to be written about. The tendency is to kind of have a superficial view of Latin America and write about the Boris and Lula and then forget the rest. No, the continent as such has become very powerful. They have an important voice today in the world affairs, and there is a lot to learn from. Latin America, including the indigenous, including the women's group, and including the young leadership of the left, how they are able to reinvent themselves. This is something that the global left also needs to do, because a lot of things have changed. You have to imagine. You have to imagine yourself in the new image, like migration. Now, what is the view that the left has to take on migration? People are really fear that migrants will kind of outnumber us and all that. So if you don't address their issues, they will not vote for you. Like that, there are many issues that you need to imagine. And this is where Latin Americans are doing. Like what is their Latin American democracy is kind of what do you call it? It's a cosmopolitan democracy. It's kind of egalitarianism that they are practicing it. This is deepening democracy and all that. And that's why it is getting more stable.
Fantastic. So, Dr. Roy, I would like you to talk a little bit about how literature, intersects politics, and how do you say that? Because Latin American literature has been something that is very rich. When we talk about the boom of the 60s and the 70s, and so many great writers have come. So how do you see that sort of, that connection?
Yeah. That also, I think you have to see it from the angle that if there is no pain, there is no gain. And I think through the pain and suffering, exploitation during the colonial period and all the latifundistas and things like that and all that. So people have kind of suffered immensely. Now when you suffer, the literature prospers. So through those sufferings, the literature has kind of emerged. And who else will be able to kind of grasp it and kind of write more meaningfully than the literary novelists and then writers and all that. It's exactly what I do. I remember what what's the name of that the lady from Chile, the great Isabel Allende. Yeah. Isabel Allende says something which is very, very interesting. She says, look, when I want to heal, I write. And that's very important. So writing is also healing. So when you kind of write about the pain and things, you also want to heal through literature. You want to write about otherings of the societies and all that.
Right.
So they have become, as I was talking earlier, that how of late even the African literature is gaining traction because they are also able to reflect the pains and sufferings of the community through the literature and all that. So this has been the advantage. But there are eras and all that, like that magical realism is gone. But today I think you have another Colombian writer who says there is too much disproportionate reality. He says that we now see. So things are, of course, I mean, they are also writing in the news and all that. And so that there are, coming to the how literature intersects, this has happened, whether it is Sarmiento or whether guy, what is the name of the Venezuelan president who was also, not Gallegos, is something else, his name. He was also great literary figure and all that. And you saw how in Peru, that great novelist who
Mario
passed,
Vargas
Mario
Llosa.
Vargas was very much into politics and all that. Many of them were as senator or as kind of diplomats and all that, because they believe that they have a role to play, and which is fine. I think why not? I think I'm very sure that at some stage that can happen to Latin America, to India and other continents also. That we need to be guided by people who have studied, who have gone through those sufferings and all that. And that phase will possibly change at some stage when a new generation of leaders we will see and all that.
Right.
So Latin America inspires. Latin America kind of heals. It entertains. It kind of gives us also food for thought. And that's why we enjoy, I think. And I looking back, and I think with the same interest, each time there is an opportunity to go there, I feel so excited about it. To go there and then experience. So good.
Wow. I haven't realized, Dr. Roy, time has just flown by chatting with you, that we are now reaching towards the end of this conversation, this fascinating conversation that I've had with you. So, Dr. Roy, now, we've spoken a lot. You've charted the relationship of India and Latin America through the decades in the last few years. So, now in the 21st century, 2025, how do you see the India-Latin America ties presently, and what potential does it have in future? Not just from an economic and trade perspective, but also culturally speaking, because now we've seen, of course, companies like HCL, Mahindra, they've set up their base in Latin America. In fact, Amul also. There are a lot of Indian companies that are shifting or sort of investing in Latin America. And also I see, Dr. Roy, when you talk about culture, Bollywood as a soft power is amazing, because when I talk to a lot of my Latin American friends, especially female friends, they are very much charmed and enchanted by Bollywood songs, even not just Bollywood, even Indian television series. So how do you see these both the economic side as well as the soft power? How can that sort of leverage relations between India and Latin America?
Yeah, you said it rightly. I think it is a soft power, because ultimately India's soft power speaks loudly, and this soft power is culture, Bollywood, of course, also soft power in terms of the IT and Indians doing well internationally and all that. But this, you could also say yoga. You could also say that many of them are attracted towards India through spiritualism and all that. So that, but now they see it in a new light. They see that country has also kind of moved ahead. And there are immense possibilities. You also have the China element that, China has become very powerful. I think it has ousted the United States as numero uno and all that. So many of them will see that if India could also be here, then we could have a kind of some kind of a balanced view.
Right.
And because India's image is very positive in that sense, that because unlike China, what happens is that China has taken advantage of that. I think we can't grudge that, because they have something to offer at a time when Americans completely withdrew. You see, in the post-Cold War period, what happens is the Americans withdrew from Africa, withdrew from Latin America and all that. And so they have taken advantage of that. Now they have something to export. They also buy from their market and all that. Now, as Gabriel Boric also said in one of the interviews during his visit here, that he finds India also very attractive, because he is also trying to create a kind of a balance, not replacing one by other. That's not the idea, but to kind of engage India. There is a lot to learn from India as well. India has its all things to offer in science, technology, in exploring the space, the deep sea and things like that, and all that. So they see a lot of advantages, and otherwise, just imagine how is it that the small countries have taken the pains to have their embassies established here. Paraguay already had for 5 years and all that. Now we have set up there and all that. You have Guatemala. You have El Salvador. You have kind of Honduras and Uruguay and all that. Of course, we still need to kind of have more such things, because they see India as a counterbalance to both US and China. Now, how much we are able to come up to their expectations will depend on how we see these opportunities. I think we have taken fairly good steps by trying to visit more frequently, invite them here to share and all that. But something more will have to be done. You see, software power have spoken. That's great. You mentioned about some of the TV serials and all that. But that's also because we are like them. When I went to Mexico, I could see that their daughters, married daughters, and their sons' wives and family will come for a lunch or dinner, and I will also be part of that and all that. Now, this was typically in India and all that. So culturally, they are very similar in terms of kind of interactions, meeting together, celebrating together on festive occasions, on many such occasions. So this has been the advantage. So they feel more comfortable dealing with India. That is the advantage. But then there are also gaps. We need to possibly take advantage of that. Don't assume that on its own it will give us dividend. We have to kind of create some mechanisms to channel this, these goodwills and all that. How do we do it? I'm no one to possibly say that, but I'm confident that our interactions will grow. But there is more to learn from that side as well. Particularly how the rise of the indigenous people, how the in terms of women's participation. What was the image of Latin America? It's a macho society. But see, in Mexico, you have the constitutional amendment whereby every organization, government and all that will have 50-50 seats. In Bolivia and all that, 47% women in parliament, in assemblies, in municipalities and all that. People don't talk about that. I mean, it has happened. So they have kind of, jumped towards, gender equality and things like that and all that. We have a long way to go and all that. So I think there is a lot to learn from Latin America as well, and not just cuisine and culture and dance, but also the soft power and the institutional innovations and all that. So I think this is the right time to kind of focus more on Latin America, just as Latin America is looking at us, and I am very positive. And thank you very much for taking so much interest in through your programs to kind of highlight the region, Spanish-speaking world. I think it is such comfortable thought in the company of someone, even if you visit, who speaks Spanish or Portuguese and you speak and all that. I don't think we feel equally comfortable if someone speaks English in Europe and all that. We are still not the same. So
Right.
good.
Right.
So
No, thank you so much, Dr.
thank you
Roy.
very much. It's a great pleasure.
We
Great pleasure.
covered from the time that you were a student here. We went through your experiences in Mexico and talking to or meeting Fidel Castro and all the way till the present time, where amidst a lot of challenges that we face across the globe, be it Donald Trump's reign, his policies, or the wars that we are seeing, not just the recent conflict between India and Pakistan that happened, but also the long worn out battle between Ukraine and Russia. I think India and Latin America as two regions have a huge role to play to shape the next 40 to 50 years or even 100 years to go. So I think in that looking from that perspective, I think your experience, Dr. Roy, has been of immense value to India at large, and I'm sure that your contribution in the field of Latin American studies will go a long way in terms of helping we normal Indians, who don't have, or at least I would say about a large percentage of Indians, who just view Latin America through the prism of a Lionel Messi. Again, soft part, but just sports is not just the main thing. There's so much more to learn about Latin America, and thank you so much, Dr. Roy, for your time.
Thank you very much. Great pleasure.
Bueno, pues ha sido un placer hablar con Dr. Roy. Hasta el siguiente capítulo de Español por Dentro. Chao.